There are things you carry with you that act like a slow-acting poison. At first, you don't even realize you've swallowed it. You think it's just a moment, a blip on the radar of your life, something you can tuck away in the back of your mind and cover up with years of new memories, distractions, and the inevitable dulling of time. But the truth is, the poison doesn't go away. It sits there. It seeps into your bloodstream. It colors every interaction you have, every time you look in the mirror, every time you hear a laugh that sounds a little too much like the one you remember. I need to tell this story not because I want forgiveness and not because I think talking about it will fix what happened. It won't. I am writing this down because the silence has become too loud to bear. I was a coward. I was a witness to something terrible, something that changes the trajectory of a person's life, and I treated it like a sitcom gag. I treated a crime like a punchline, and I've been living with the ghost of that night ever since. To understand how I ended up in that closet, you have to understand the kind of people we were back then. We weren't evil, at least not in the way you see in movies, with villains twirling mustaches. We were worse because we were banal. We were bored, stupid, and intoxicated by that specific brand of teenage invincibility that makes you think consequences are things that happen to other people. We were the guys who thought everything was a joke. Nothing was sacred. Boundaries were just lines drawn in the sand for us to kick over so we could feel like we had some semblance of power. It was a party, the kind where the parents are out of town and the house is filled with people you only half know. The air was thick with the smell of cheap body spray, spilled beer, and that humid electric energy of 50 kids trying to act older than they were. I was there with Eugene Lindemann. Eugen was the kind of friend who was like a natural disaster, exciting to be around until the house falls down. He had this manic energy, a grin that was always a little too wide eyes, that were always scanning for the next bit of chaos he could manufacture. When you were with Eugene, you felt like you were part of the main cast, like everyone else was just an NPC in his video game. We were wandering the upstairs hallway away from the noise of the bass thumping downstairs. The floorboards creaked under our sneakers. The hallway was dim lit, only by the spill of light from the bathroom at the far end. We were looking for alcohol, or maybe just looking for a place to smoke where we wouldn't get caught. That's when we heard voices coming up the stairs, giggling, the scuff of feet, the heavy, playful breathing of two people who are wrapped up in each other. Eugen grabbed my arm, his grip tight. "Come on!" He whispered, his eyes gleaming with that dangerous spark. He jerked his head toward the nearest bedroom door. It was a guest room, I think. Or maybe the parents' room. I don't remember whose house it was anymore. Isn't that sick? I don't remember the host, but I remember the texture of the carpet in that closet. "Why?" I asked, stumbling a bit as he pulled me. "Just hide," he hissed, laughing under his breath. "Let's scare whoever comes in. It'll be funny." It wasn't a malicious plan initially. It was juvenile. It was the prank of a 12-year-old stuck in an 18-year-old's body. We slipped into the room and the darkness swallowed us immediately. The room smelled of lavender and dust. Eugen made a beeline for the closet. It was a walk-in closet, deep and narrow, filled with the heavy woolly scent of winter coats and expensive dry cleaning. We scrambled to the back, pushing aside hangers that clattered like wind chimes in a storm. Eugene was practically vibrating with excitement. He pulled me down into a crouch behind a row of long trench coats that smelled faintly of mothballs and cedar. Shut up," he whispered, though I hadn't said a word. He was giggling, that high-pitched wheezing sound he made when he thought he was getting away with something. Through the slats of the closet door, we could see the bedroom. It was bathed in shadows, the only illumination coming from the streetlights filtering through the blinds on the far window. The door to the hallway opened, casting a wide, expanding rectangle of yellow light across the carpet, and then they stumbled in. I recognized them immediately. The guy was Manel. He was one of those guys who seemed to glide through high school without ever hitting a bump, athletic, easy smile, the kind of guy who could charm a teacher into changing a grade. And the girl? I won't say her name. I don't have the right to speak her name after what I did, but I knew her. She was quiet, kind, the type of person who always remembered your birthday, even if you weren't close. She looked happy, tipsy, leaning into Manel as if he was the only solid thing in a spanning world. They were laughing, a soft, intimate sound that made my stomach twist. I suddenly felt the immense weight of the intrusion. This wasn't funny. This wasn't a prank. We were trespassing on a private moment, and every second we stayed hidden, the violation compounded. I nudged Eugene, signaling that we should just burst out, now make a joke of it, and leave before anything happened. But Eugene grabbed my wrist, his fingers digging into my skin like talons. He shook his head, his eyes wide and gleaming in the dark. He put a finger to his lips. He wanted to watch. He wanted to see how far this would go before we made our presence known. The bedroom door clicked shut, plunging the room back into semi-darkness. The dynamic shifted instantly. The playfulness settled into something heavier, more urgent. We sat there huddled in the dark, literal meters away from them. I could hear the rustle of fabric, the soft exhale of breath, the creak of the bed frame as they sat down. It was consensual. It was two people who wanted each other, and we were the parasites feeding off their privacy. I wanted to cover my ears. I wanted to disappear. I remember staring at the pattern on the floor of the closet, trying to detach myself from reality, trying to convince myself I wasn't really there. But Eugene was glued to the slats of the door. He was mesmerized. Then things got quiet. The rhythm of the room settled. The girl was tired, maybe more intoxicated than I had realized. From the sounds of it, she was drifting half asleep, trusting the person she was with. Trusting Manel. She was vulnerable in the way you are when you finally let your guard down, when you close your eyes and let the world drift away because you think you are safe. But she wasn't safe. She was in a room with 4 guys and none of us were on her side. That's when the energy in the room spiked. It wasn't a sound exactly, it was a shift in the air, a tension that snapped like a rubber band. I looked up, peering through the gap in the coats, trying to see what Eugen was looking at. The door to the bedroom cracked open again, just a sliver, but enough to let a shadow slip in. Or maybe he had been there the whole time, hiding in the bathroom waiting. It was Wadim Manch. Wadim was different from Manel. Wadim was heavy, brooding, with a reputation that hovered around him like a bad smell. He was the guy you avoided making eye contact with at parties because you didn't want to be on his radar. I watched confused as Manel, the guy she chose, the guy she trusted, pulled away. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't check on her. He just rolled off. He moved with a calculated silence that makes me sick to my stomach when I think about it now. He jumped away, creating a space. And in that space, Wadim pounced. It happened so fast, yet in my memory it plays out in agonizing slow motion. The girl was half asleep, her defenses down, her mind likely drifting in that hazy space between consciousness and dreams. She expected Manel. She expected the boy she liked. Instead, she got Wadim. He didn't ask. He didn't hesitate. He jumped on her, taking the place that Manel had vacated. It was a bait and switch, a coordinated silent handoff. Manel stood by the side of the bed, watching while Wadim forced himself into the narrative. I felt the blood drain from my face. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I thought they would hear it. This was wrong. This was criminal. Every alarm bell in my head was ringing, screaming at me to move, to shout, to kick the door open and stop it. Do something, my brain screamed. Do something. But my body was made of lead. I looked at Eugen. I expected to see horror on his face. I expected him to be the one to break the spell. But Eugen was laughing. It wasn't a loud laugh. It was a silent, shaking convulsion of his shoulders. He had his hand over his mouth to stifle the sound, but his eyes were crinkled at the corners. He found it funny. He found the deception, the violation, the sheer audacity of the switch to be the height of comedy. And then he did something that haunts me more than the silence. Eugen reached up. Inside the closet, there was a small battery-operated touchlight stuck to the wall, probably left there by the homeowners to help find shoes in the dark. Eugen looked at me, his eyes manic, and he pressed it. Click. The closet flooded with a harsh white LED light. It was blindingly bright in our small confined space. The light poured out through the slats of the closet door, cutting through the dim bedroom like a laser beam. It was a spotlight. It was Eugen announcing our presence, not to stop the assault, but to add another layer of terror to the girl's nightmare. He wanted to spook them. He wanted to be the ghost in the room. The movement on the bed stopped instantly. The girl's voice, thick with sleep and sudden fear, cut through the silence. Is someone there? Her voice was trembling. She sounded so small. She wasn't just asking if someone was there. She was asking if she was crazy. She was asking why the world felt wrong, why the person touching her felt different, why a light had suddenly appeared from the closet. She was realizing in real time that her safety was an illusion. Is someone there? She asked again, louder this time, panic rising in her throat. I held my breath until my lungs burned. I stared at the light on the wall, wishing I could smash it, wishing I could vanish. We didn't answer. We didn't say, yes, we're here and this is wrong. We didn't say, get off her, Wadim. We didn't say, run. We sat in the closet 3 meters away from a girl who was being preyed upon, and we stayed silent. Eugen smirked, turning the light off again, plunging us back into darkness, leaving her with the terrifying uncertainty of whether she was being watched or if she was losing her mind. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. It was the sound of complicity. By saying nothing, by doing nothing, we had joined them. We weren't just witnesses anymore. We were participants. We were the audience that allowed the show to go on. I don't know how long we stayed in that closet after the light went out. Time distorts when you're terrified, stretching and warping until minutes feel like hours. The room had gone quiet again, but it wasn't a peaceful silence. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a graveyard. I sat there with my knees pulled to my chest, my breath shallow, listening to the sound of my own pulse thumping in my ears. Beside me, Eugen had finally stopped giggling, but I could feel him vibrating with that leftover adrenaline, that sick delight he took in chaos. He didn't care about what had happened. To him, the night was just a series of events to be recounted later, a story to be embellished and laughed about over beers. To him, the terror in that girl's voice was just a sound effect. Eventually, the door to the bedroom opened and closed. Heavy footsteps retreated down the hall. We waited another 10 minutes, maybe 20, just to be sure. I wanted to stay in that closet forever. I wanted to decompose there, amongst the wool coats and the dust bunnies, because the moment I stepped out, I would have to face the reality of who I was. I would have to walk back into the world knowing that I was the kind of person who watches. When we finally crept out, the room was empty. The bed was unmade. The sheets tangled, a mute testament to the violation that had just occurred. The air still smelled of sweat and that cloying body spray. We slipped out of the room like thieves, blending back into the dying embers of the party. I didn't look for Manel. I didn't look for Wadim. I didn't want to see their faces because I was terrified I would see my own reflection in them. I grabbed a beer from the kitchen, not because I wanted to drink, but because I needed something to do with my hands, something to ground me in the physical world. I drank it in 3 gulps, trying to wash away the taste of bile in my throat. I didn't sleep that night. I found a corner on a sagging sofa downstairs and stared at the ceiling as the party wound down as people passed out or stumbled home. Every time a floorboard creaked upstairs, I flinched. I kept replaying the scene in my head, editing it, changing the script. In my head, I burst out of the closet. In my head, I grabbed Wadim by the collar and threw him off. In my head, I told the girl, "It's okay, we're here. You're safe." I was a hero in my imagination, but in reality, I was just a lump of flesh on a couch, paralyzed by my own cowardice. Morning came with a brutal, unforgiving brightness. The sun didn't care about what happened in the dark. It just poured through the windows, illuminating the sticky floors, the red Solo cups, the debris of the night before. People were waking up groaning, nursing hangovers. The atmosphere was grim, the magic of the night replaced by the headache of the morning. And then I saw her. She came down the stairs slowly, her hand gripping the banister. She looked pale, her hair messy, wearing the same clothes from the night before. She looked like a ghost. There were dark circles under her eyes, and she moved with a fragility that made my chest ache. I froze. I wanted to run. I wanted to phase through the wall, but she looked up, scanned the room, and her eyes locked onto mine. She didn't scream. She didn't point an accusing finger. She just gave a small, tired half smile, a polite acknowledgement. "Hey," she croaked, her voice raspy. "Hey," I managed to choke out. My voice sounded foreign, like it belonged to someone else. Do you know if anyone is heading towards the city?" she asked. "My phone is dead and I really just want to go home." The universe has a twisted sense of humor. Of all the people in that house, of all the drivers, of all the potential exits, she asked me. Maybe it was because I looked sober. Maybe it was because I looked harmless. God, if she only knew. Harmless is the mask that cowards wear. "I can take you," I said. The words left my mouth before I could stop them. It was a reflex, a desperate attempt to pay a debt that couldn't be paid. I thought, if I drive her home, if I get her to safety, maybe it counts for something. Maybe it erases 1% of the guilt. "Really?" She looked relieved. "That would be amazing. Thank you." Walking to the car felt like a funeral procession. The gravel crunched loudly under our feet. The morning air was crisp and cold, a stark contrast to the suffocating heat of the closet. We got into my beat-up sedan, the seats freezing against our backs. She buckled her seatbelt, the click echoing in the small space. I started the engine and we pulled away from the house of horrors. The drive was about 30 minutes. 30 minutes of torture. For the first few miles, neither of us spoke. The radio was off. The only sound was the hum of the tires on the asphalt and the heater fan rattling as it tried to warm up the car. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. I kept glancing at her out of the corner of my eye. She was staring out the window, watching the trees blur past. She looked lost in thought. Every second of silence felt like an accusation. I was dissecting her expression, looking for signs. Did she know? Did she remember the light? Did she remember the voice asking, "Is someone there?" Did she remember that Manel left and Wadim took his place? Or was it all a blur of alcohol and sleep? "Rough night," she murmured finally, not looking away from the window. My heart skipped a beat. "Yeah," I said carefully. "Yeah, it was." She sighed, leaning her head against the cool glass. "I feel weird," she said quietly. I almost slammed on the brakes. She remembers. "Weird how?" I asked, my voice tight. "Just, I don't know, groggy. I have these flashes, but I can't tell what was a dream and what was real." She turned to look at me then, and her eyes were searching, vulnerable. Were you upstairs at all last night?" The question hung in the air between us, suspended like a guillotine blade. This was it. This was the moment. I could tell her. I could say yes, I was there. I was in the closet. I saw Manel leave you. I saw Wadim. I saw everything and I did nothing. I could give her the truth no matter how much it hurt me because she deserved to know what had been done to her body and her trust. But I looked at her and I saw the exhaustion, the confusion. And then I looked at myself in the rearview mirror, a scared kid, terrified of getting involved, terrified of Wadim, terrified of being exposed as a voyeur. No, I lied. No, I was downstairs the whole time, with the guys. The lie tasted like ash. It was smooth and practiced, the defense mechanism of a person who values their own comfort over the truth. "Oh," she said. She seemed to deflate a little, or maybe she was just relaxing. "Okay, I had this weird dream that there were people watching me, like eyes in the wall, and a bright light. It sounds crazy, right?" "Yeah," I whispered. "Sounds like a crazy dream." She let out a small, hollow laugh. "God, I need to stop drinking." We fell back into silence, but this silence was different. Before it was the silence of two people tired from a party. Now it was a silence built on a foundation of deceit. I was driving the getaway car not for her, but for myself. I was driving us away from the truth as fast as the speed limit allowed. As we got closer to her house, the guilt began to morph into something sharper, something more panic-inducing. I realized that by lying, I hadn't just protected myself, I had protected Manel and Wadim. I had become their accomplice after the fact. I had sealed the events of the night into a vault. If she didn't remember and I didn't speak, then technically in the eyes of the world, it never happened. But it did happen. It happened 3 meters away from me. I pulled up to her curb. It was a nice house, suburban manicured lawn. A normal life waiting for her behind the front door. She unbuckled her seatbelt and turned to me. "Thanks for the ride," she said, offering that sweet, unsuspecting smile again. "You're a lifesaver. You're a lifesaver." The irony was so sharp it almost drew blood. I wanted to grab her arm. I wanted to shake her and say, "Don't thank me. Spit on me. Scream at me. I am the reason you don't know why you feel violated today." "No problem," I said instead. "Take care." She opened the door, stepped out, and walked up the driveway. I watched her go. I watched her fumble with her keys, unlock the door, and step inside. The door closed, and she was gone. I sat in my idling car for a long time. The heater was blasting, now hot air blowing into my face, but I felt freezing cold. I looked at my hands on the steering wheel. They were the same hands that had held the beer, the same hands that had failed to open the closet door. They looked normal, but they felt stained. I put the car in drive and drove away, leaving her to figure out the puzzle of her trauma on her own while I carried the missing pieces in my pocket, too cowardly to hand them over. The drive home from her house was a blur. I don't remember the roads I took or the songs that played on the radio. All I remember is the gnawing sensation in my gut, a physical manifestation of the lie I had just told. I had sealed the tomb. I had looked her in the eye and denied her reality. I had become the architect of her confusion. When I got home, I went straight to my room and collapsed on my bed, still dressed in the clothes from the night before. The smell of the party, stale beer sweat, that cloying perfume seemed to cling to me, seeping into my pores. I stared at the ceiling, tracing the cracks in the plaster, trying to make sense of what I had done, or rather, what I hadn't done. I thought about calling Eugen. I picked up my phone a dozen times, my thumb hovering over his name. But what would I say? "Hey, remember that thing we watched last night? The thing that was a crime?" Eugen would laugh. He would make a joke about it being wild or crazy. He would minimize it, turn it into another anecdote for his collection of teenage misadventures. And if I brought up the guilt, if I mentioned the sick feeling in my stomach, he would look at me with that mocking glint in his eye and call me soft. He would remind me that we didn't do anything. We were just there. Just there. That was the phrase I clung to. It was my shield. I didn't touch her. I didn't plan it. I was just a bystander. But deep down, I knew that being a bystander is an active choice. It's a choice to let the world happen to someone else while you watch from the safety of the sidelines. The next few days at school were torture. I walked through the halls like a ghost, terrified that everyone could see the stain on my soul. I saw Manel in the cafeteria laughing with his friends, throwing grapes at a girl across the table. He looked normal, unbothered. He didn't look like a guy who had just orchestrated a sexual assault by proxy. He looked like the golden boy he always was. And Wadim was just Wadim, sullen, lurking on the edges of conversations, his presence heavy and menacing. Did they know we were in the closet? Did they see the light? They must have. But neither of them said a word to me. It was a silent pact of mutual destruction. If they spoke about us, they exposed themselves. If we spoke about them, we exposed ourselves as voyeurs and cowards. So we all just pretended. We pretended the night never happened. But the girl, I saw her too. She was quieter. The easy smile was gone, replaced by a guarded, distant look. She walked with her head down, avoiding eye contact. I watched her from across the room in English class, dissecting her every movement. Was she remembering? Was she piecing it together? Or was she just lost in that vague, unsettling fog she had described in the car? One day, about a week later, I found myself standing next to her at her locker. My heart hammered against my ribs. I should have walked away. I should have kept my distance. But something pulled me toward her, a morbid curiosity or maybe a twisted desire for absolution. "Hey," I said, my voice sounding too loud in the quiet hallway. She jumped a little, turning to look at me. Her eyes were wide, startled. "Oh, hey. How are you doing?" I asked. It was a stupid question. A loaded question. She hesitated, biting her lip. "Okay, I guess. Tired." She forced a small, polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Thanks again for the ride the other day. I was kind of a mess." "Don't worry about it," I said quickly. Anyone would have done it. Anyone would have done it? Another lie? Anyone decent would have stopped it before it started? Anyone brave would have told her the truth. I was neither. She looked at me for a long moment, her gaze searching my face. I felt a bead of sweat trickle down my back. "You know," she said slowly, "I keep having these weird feelings, like I'm forgetting something important. Did anything weird happen at that party before I left?" My stomach dropped. This was my second chance. The universe was handing me an opportunity on a silver platter. I could tell her right now. I could say yes. Something weird happened. Something terrible. But then I saw Manel walk by at the end of the hall. He didn't look at us, but his presence was a reminder of the social hierarchy I lived in. If I spoke up, I was declaring war on guys like Manel and Wadim. I was making myself a target. And for what? To confirm a nightmare for a girl who might be better off not knowing? That was the excuse I fed myself. She's better off not knowing. It was a cowardly rationalization designed to protect my own skin while masquerading as benevolence. "No," I said, shaking my head. "Nothing weird. Just a regular party. People got drunk. People did stupid stuff. You know how it is." She nodded slowly, looking disappointed or maybe just resigned. "Yeah, I guess." She closed her locker with a metallic clang. "Well, see you around?" See you, I mumbled. I watched her walk away, her shoulders slumped under the weight of her backpack. I had failed her again, I had cemented the lie, and in doing so, I had become an active participant in the cover-up. I wasn't just the guy in the closet anymore, I was the guy holding the door shut from the outside. Years went by, we graduated, we moved away. Life happened in a blur of college applications, new jobs, new cities. The sharp edges of high school memories, usually dull with time, turning into nostalgic anecdotes you laugh about, over drinks. But this memory didn't dull, it sharpened, it grew teeth. I would be at a bar with friends laughing at some stupid story, and suddenly the image of that closet door would flash in my mind. The smell of lavender and dust would fill my nose. The sound of Eugene's stifled giggle would echo in my ears, and the guilt would crash over me like a rogue wave pulling me under. I tried to rationalize it. I told myself we were kids. I told myself we were scared. I told myself it wasn't my fault Manel and Wadim were predators, but the older I got, the more hollow those excuses sounded. Being young doesn't excuse cruelty. Being scared doesn't justify silence. And then about 5 years later, I ran into Eugen. I hadn't seen him since graduation. He was back in town for the holidays, looking older, thicker, but with that same manic glint in his eyes. We met up for drinks at a local dive bar, the kind of place where the floor sticks to your shoes and the music is always too loud. We talked about the usual stuff, jobs, relationships, who got fat, who got rich. Eugen was doing well, working in sales, charming people out of their money. He seemed happy, unburdened. After a few beers, the conversation drifted to high school. Man, we were idiots back then. Eugen laughed, shaking his head. Remember that time we stole the mascot costume? Or when we put that car on the roof? I nodded, forcing a smile, but my mind was drifting to a different memory. I couldn't help it. It was like a sore tooth I couldn't stop poking. Hey, I said, my voice dropping a little. Do you remember that party at, I think it was the Miller's house junior year? Eugen frowned, trying to place it. Which one? We went to a million parties. The one where we hid in the closet? I said. Upstairs. Recognition dawned on his face. A slow, creeping smile spread across his lips. Oh shit. Yeah, with Manel and that girl. What was her name again? I don't remember. I lied. I remembered. I would always remember. That was wild. Eugen chuckled, taking a swig of his beer. Man, that was so fucked up. The way Wadim just swapped in genius. I stared at him. Genius. The word hit me like a physical blow. He didn't see it as a crime. He didn't see it as a tragedy. He saw it as a clever trick, a highlight reel moment. It wasn't genius, Eugen, I said, my voice tight. It was assault. It was wrong. Eugen's smile faltered. He looked at me confused, as if I had just started speaking a foreign language. Whoa, relax. It was just a joke, man. They were all wasted. No harm done. No harm done, I repeated, my voice rising. We watched a guy trick a girl into sleeping with him while we sat there and laughed. We turned on a fucking light, Eugen. We terrified her. He rolled his eyes, leaning back in his chair. You're being dramatic. That was years ago. Why do you care now? Because I drove her home the next day. I said, the words spilling out of me like venom. I drove her home and she asked me if anything weird happened, and I lied to her face. I lied to protect us, to protect you. Eugen stared at me for a long moment, his expression hardening. The manic glint was gone, replaced by something colder, something dismissive. Look, he said, his voice low. You did what you had to do. Don't act like you're some saint now. You were in that closet too. You laughed too. He was right, and that was the dagger in my heart. I wasn't a saint, I was his accomplice. Yeah, I whispered, looking down at my beer. I know. We finished our drinks in silence. The easy camaraderie was gone, replaced by the ugly truth of what we shared. We weren't just old friends catching up. We were co-conspirators in a dirty secret. I walked home that night feeling heavier than I had in years. Seeing Eugene, hearing him dismiss it so casually, made me realize something terrifying. The world is full of people who do terrible things and sleep soundly at night. And I was one of them, not because I did the terrible thing, but because I let them sleep. I realized then that I couldn't keep carrying this alone. The silence was poison, and it was killing me from the inside out. I needed to do something. I needed to acknowledge the reality of that night, even if it was years too late. Even if it changed nothing for her. Even if it only served to confirm that I was a coward. That walk home from the bar was the longest walk of my life. The alcohol did nothing to numb me. Instead, it seemed to sharpen the edges of my guilt, making every thought a razor blade. Eugene's casual dismissal, his use of the word genius, echoed in my head. He had given me a gift in a twisted way. He had stripped away any lingering hope I had that what we did was a forgivable mistake of youth. He showed me the event for what it was, a piece of entertainment for him and a lifelong burden for me. He had moved on. He was sleeping just fine. The poison was mine alone to carry. I got back to my small apartment, the one I had been so proud of, and it suddenly felt like a prison cell. The neat stacks of books, the framed posters on the wall, they all seemed like a facade. A desperate attempt to build a life for a decent person. I wasn't. I tossed my keys on the counter, the clatter deafening in the silence. I knew I couldn't go on like this. The weight was too heavy. It was crushing me, turning me into a bitter, hollowed-out version of a man. I had to do something. The silence had to end. My first impulse was a desperate, almost primal need to find her. Not to talk to her, not yet, but just to know. To know she was okay. To see if she had survived the ripple effects of that night, the ones I helped create by staying quiet. In high school, she was a person I saw in the halls. Now she was a concept, a ghost that haunted my conscience. I needed to know if the ghost had a life. I sat down at my laptop, my hands trembling slightly as I opened a social media page. It felt like a monumental transgression, another violation of her privacy. But I couldn't stop myself. I typed her name into the search bar. The name I had lied about not remembering to Eugen. The search results populated a list of strangers who shared her name. I clicked through profiles, my heart pounding with a mixture of dread and anticipation. I saw faces from different cities, different countries, none of them her. For a moment, a wave of relief washed over me. Maybe she was off the grid. Maybe I couldn't find her. Maybe that was a sign from the universe to just let it go. But I kept scrolling, and then I saw it. It was a profile picture of her standing on a beach, smiling. It was an older picture, maybe from college. But it was her. The same kind eyes, the same soft curve of her mouth. She looked happy. She looked whole. My breath caught in my throat. I clicked on her profile. It was mostly private, but there were a few public photos. A picture of a golden retriever puppy tangled in Christmas lights, a shot of her, and a group of friends, all of them laughing, raising glasses of wine to the camera. And then, the one that stopped my heart. A wedding photo. She was in a white dress looking radiant, her husband's arm wrapped around her waist. They were standing under a tree, sunlight filtering through the leaves, and she had never looked more beautiful or more at peace. I felt a dizzying mix of emotions. There was profound relief. She was okay. She had a life. She had found love and happiness. She had built something good and pure out of the wreckage of her teenage years. But underneath the relief was something uglier. A deep, gut-wrenching shame. Her happiness didn't absolve me. In fact, it made my silence even more grotesque. I had guarded a secret that could have shattered this beautiful life she had built. I had let her go on unaware of the full story while I wallowed in a guilt she knew nothing about. Who was I to hold this power over her? Who was I to know a fundamental truth about her past that she didn't? I sat there for hours just staring at her face. I imagined her life. Her husband, her dog, her friends. Did she ever think about that night? Did the strange, unsettling feeling ever come back? Did she ever wake up in a cold sweat from a dream about eyes in the wall and a sudden, inexplicable flash of light? The urge to confess, to reach out, was overwhelming. I opened a message window. The cursor blinked a rhythmic, mocking pulse. Type something, it seemed to say. Go on. Ruin her day. Ruin her year. Do it for you. Do it so you can finally sleep at night. What could I possibly write? Hey, we don't really know each other, but I was at a party with you years ago. You may not remember, but something terrible happened to you, and I watched it from a closet and did nothing to stop it. I am so sorry. Anyway, hope you and the puppy are doing well. It was insane. It was monstrously selfish. To send a message like that out of the blue would be like throwing a rock through the stained glass window of her life. It wouldn't be for her, it would be for me. It would be a selfish, desperate attempt to offload my burden onto her, to force her to carry the weight of the full truth so that I could finally put it down. I typed out a message, my fingers fumbling on the keys. I need to tell you something about that night at the Miller's house. I stared at the words. They looked like an incendiary device. I deleted it. I tried again. I'm so sorry I was there. Deleted. Again. You deserve to know the truth. Deleted. I slammed the laptop shut. I stood up and started pacing my small living room, my mind racing. I couldn't contact her. It was too cruel. It was another violation, a different kind of assault, an assault on her peace, on her carefully constructed happiness. I had failed to protect her then, and the only decent thing I could do now was to continue to protect her from the knowledge I carried. But the silence was still poison. The conversation with Eugen had uncorked something in me, and I couldn't put it back in the bottle. I felt like I was going to explode. The story was a living thing inside me, scratching at my ribs, clawing at my throat, demanding to be let out. If I couldn't tell her, who could? I'd tell I had no one. My parents. They would be horrified, ashamed of me. My friends. They would look at me differently forever, branding me as the guy who hid in the closet. A therapist? Maybe. But that felt too clinical, too sterile. It would be an analysis, not a confession. I sat back down at my desk, my head in my hands. The problem was that the story had no place to go. It was a radioactive material that I couldn't hand to anyone without poisoning them too. And that's when the thought came to me. It was the last resort of the desperate and the damned. I would write it down, not for her, not for Eugen, not for anyone I knew. I would write it for strangers. I would cast it out into the anonymous void of the internet. I would tell the whole story, every ugly, shameful detail from the moment we stepped into that closet to the moment I drove away from her house. I would put it all down, not as an excuse, but as a testament to my own failure. It wouldn't fix anything. It wouldn't undo the past. It wouldn't bring justice for her or punishment for them. But it would be something other than silence. It would be a confession to the world, if not to the one person who deserved to hear it most. It would be my way of finally saying, this happened, it was real, and I was there. I opened a blank document. The cursor blinked, waiting. But this time it didn't feel mocking. It felt like an invitation. An opportunity to finally let the poison out. I took a deep breath, the first one that felt like it reached the bottom of my lungs in years, and I began to type. The first sentence was the hardest. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, shaking so badly I had to clench my fists and press them against my thighs just to steady myself. When I finally brought my hands back up, I didn't try to make it poetic. I didn't try to dress it up or excuse my behavior or paint myself in a sympathetic light. I just let the ugly, unvarnished truth spill out onto the glaring white background of the screen. I was in a literal closet with a friend while it happened 3 meters away from me. As soon as the words appeared, it felt as though I was physically extracting the memory from my brain, pulling it out through my fingertips. The clack of the keyboard was the only sound in my apartment, sharp and rhythmic like a metronome ticking away the last remnants of my denial. I sat in the dark, the blue light of the monitor casting long, distorted shadows against the walls, illuminating my pale, exhausted face in the reflection of the glass. I forced myself to type out the names. I didn't hide them behind initials or vague descriptions. Eugene Lindemann, Manel, Vadim, Manch. Seeing their names rendered in stark black digital ink was a profound shock to my system. For years they had been phantoms, abstract figures floating in the hazy periphery of my nightmares. But typing their full names dragged them back into reality. It made the crime tangible. It stripped away the illusion that this was just a bad dream or a twisted coming-of-age story. It was a documented event now. I wrote about the bait and switch. I described how the girl had been half asleep, completely vulnerable, trusting the person she thought was beside her. I described how Manel seamlessly jumped away in orchestrated retreat, making room for Wadim to jump on her. I typed out the mechanics of the assault with a cold clinical precision because that was the only way I could get through it without completely breaking down. And then I had to write about myself. I had to document my own moral rot. I typed the words I was in the closet and laughed with a friend. I stared at that sentence for a long time. The cursor blinked at the end of it, practically mocking me. Did I laugh? In my memory, it was Eugene who was laughing, Eugene who found it funny. But the truth is, memory is a self-serving editor. Maybe I did laugh. Maybe it was a nervous laugh, a terrified, suffocated sound born of pure panic and cowardice. Or maybe by simply being there, by staying in that closet alongside a boy who was giggling at a sexual assault, I had absorbed his laughter. My silence was a laugh. My inaction was a laugh. Writing that sentence made me want to throw up. It felt like carving a permanent confession into my own flesh. I kept typing. I detailed the moment Eugen reached for the touchlight. My friend Eugen Lindemann even started the light, and she asked if someone were, and yet we didn't intervene. The grammar was messy, my spelling slipping as my hands moved faster, driven by a desperate, panicked momentum. I didn't stop to correct it. The raw, unpolished nature of the text felt right. This wasn't a novel. It was a hemorrhage. I could feel my heart pounding against my ribs, a dull, heavy ache spreading through my chest as I recounted the drive home the next day. I described the suffocating silence in the car, her quiet confusion, and my shameful, cowardly relief when she finally stepped out of my vehicle and walked away. I drove her home the next DOS, and I had no idea if she even remembered what happened, but I was ashamed until I wrote it down just now. I stopped. My hands fell away from the keyboard, dropping into my lap like dead weights. I was breathing hard as if I had just run for miles. The screen blurred in front of me, the black text swimming in a sudden, overwhelming rush of tears. I hadn't cried in years. Not over this. I had been too busy running from it, too busy building walls and rationalizations to actually sit down and mourn the sheer devastation of that night. But now seeing it all laid out in front of me in a matter of paragraphs, the dam finally broke. I wept for her. I wept for the girl who had her trust shattered in the dark. And as pathetic as it is to admit, I wept for the boy I used to be, the boy who was too weak to open a wooden door and do the right thing. I wiped my face with the back of my sleeve, taking a deep, ragged breath. There it was. The poison was out of my head and on the screen. Now came the final terrifying step. I copied the text, opened a new tab, and navigated to Reddit. It was the only place I could think of. A sprawling, anonymous void filled with millions of strangers reading the darkest, most intimate secrets of people they would never meet. It was a modern-day confessional booth, stripped of priests and absolution, offering only the harsh, unfiltered judgment of the crowd. I pasted the text into the submission box. I didn't add a title, I didn't add context or ask for advice. I just let the story stand on its own. My hand trembled as I moved the mouse over the post button. This was the point of no return. Once I clicked it, the secret wouldn't just belong to me, Eugen Manel, and Wadim anymore. It would belong to the world. It would be indexed, archived, and read by people sitting on buses, lying in their beds, drinking their morning coffee. It would become public domain. I closed my eyes, visualizing the girl in her wedding dress, smiling under the sun. "I'm sorry," I thought to her, projecting the apology into the silent room. "I'm so sorry." I clicked the button. The page loaded for a fraction of a second, and then it refreshed. My text was there, published under a throwaway username sitting at the top of the feed. I instantly felt a rush of absolute terror. What had I done? My mind raced through catastrophic scenarios. What if somehow someone figured out who I was? What if the girl was on this exact forum? What if Eugene saw it? The anonymity of the internet suddenly felt paper thin, a fragile shield that could shatter at any moment. I moved my cursor over the delete button. I could take it back, I could erase it and pretend this moment of weakness never happened, but I forced my hand away from the mouse. No. I had hidden in a closet once. I wasn't going to hide again. I needed to face whatever came next. I got up from my desk, walked to the kitchen, and poured myself a glass of cold water. My hands were still shaking so badly that the water sloshed over the rim, spilling onto the counter. I drank it in one long gulp, the cold water grounding me, pulling me back into my physical body. When I walked back to my computer 10 minutes later, the screen had gone to sleep. I jiggled the mouse to wake it up. There was a red notification icon glowing at the top right corner of the screen. Someone had read it. Someone had responded. My stomach plummeted. I sat down slowly, the joints in my knees feeling brittle and weak. I clicked the notification, the page taking an agonizingly long time to load. I didn't know what I was expecting. Outrage. Disgust. Validation. I braced myself for the impact, preparing to read the words of a stranger telling me what a monster I was. I already knew I was a monster, but having someone else say it would make it an undeniable objective truth. The comments loaded, and as my eyes scanned the first few lines of text, the breath was knocked out of me all over again. The first comment was short, a jagged glass shard of a sentence that cut through my remaining defenses. You are a coward. That was it. No long-winded explanation, no nuance, just 4 words that summed up the entirety of my existence for the last several years. I stared at the screen, the words burning into my retinas. I wanted to argue, to type out a 1,000-word defense about being young and scared and under the influence of a charismatic sociopathic friend. But I couldn't. Because the stranger was right. I was a coward. I had always been a coward. I refreshed the page and the notification count jumped from 1 to 12, then 20, then 50. The post was catching fire. It was the kind of story that the internet feeds on, dark, morally ambiguous, and filled with a visceral sense of injustice. I watched in a daze as the upvotes climbed into the hundreds. It was a surreal, sickening feeling. My deepest, most shameful secret was becoming a piece of content, a topic of debate for people across the globe who were currently sitting in their offices or lying in their beds judging me. The comments began to blur together into a cacophony of voices. Some were filled with a righteous, white-hot anger. How could you just sit there? One person wrote, you heard her voice, you saw the light, and you did nothing. You're just as guilty as the guys who did it. Another comment, even more pointed, said, you didn't just hide in a closet, you hid in your own life. You let a predator walk free and a victim live in a lie just so you wouldn't have to feel uncomfortable. Every word felt like a physical blow. I sat there hunched over my laptop taking the hits. I felt like I was back in that closet, but this time the walls were made of glass and the entire world was standing on the outside peering in at me with disgust. But then I saw a different kind of comment. It was from a woman who didn't lead with anger. She wrote, I was that girl, not your girl, but I was her. I spent years wondering why things felt wrong, why I had gaps in my memory that felt like black holes. Hearing your story makes me sick, but it also makes me realize that my gut feeling wasn't crazy. You think you're protecting her by staying silent, but you're actually gaslighting her entire reality? You're leaving her to fight a ghost that you have the power to name. I had to close the laptop. I stood up and walked to the window, leaning my forehead against the cool glass. The street below was quiet, the orange glow of the streetlights casting long shadows across the pavement. I thought about the girl, the real girl, the one in the wedding dress. I thought about her gut feeling. I thought about the eyes in the wall she had mentioned in the car. I had spent years telling myself that I was being kind by not telling her that I was preserving her peace. But this stranger on the internet had just stripped that lie away. I wasn't preserving her peace. I was preserving her ignorance. I was letting her live in a world that wasn't real. The weight of the names I had included in the post began to press down on me. Manel, Wadim Manch, Eugen Lindemann. I had put them out there. I had named the ghosts. Part of me was terrified that they would find out that there would be legal repercussions or social fallout. But another part of me, a part that was finally slowly starting to wake up, wanted them to find out. I wanted Manel to see his name associated with his cowardice. I wanted Wadim to see his name associated with his crime. And I wanted Eugen to see that his joke wasn't funny to anyone else. I went back to the computer. The post had thousands of upvotes now. It had been shared to other subreddits. And someone had even linked a news article about a similar case in a different country. The conversation had spiraled far beyond my initial confession. People were debating the legality of what happened, the psychology of the bystander effect, and the ethics of anonymous confessions. I scrolled down through the hundreds of comments, looking for something though I didn't know what. And then I saw a private message notification. My heart hammered against my ribs as I clicked on it. The message was from a brand new account created only minutes ago. The subject line was empty. I opened it and the room seemed to go cold. I know who you are. the message began. I know whose house that was, I know the girl, and I think it's time she knew the truth too. I sat frozen, the cursor blinking at the end of the message. My secret was no longer just an anonymous story on the internet, it was a ticking time bomb. Someone out there had connected the dots. Someone knew the names, the place, and the people involved. The shield of anonymity had shattered, leaving me standing in the middle of a clearing with no place to hide. I felt a surge of pure, unadulterated panic. My first instinct was to delete everything: the post, the account, the message. I wanted to scrub my existence from the digital world and disappear back into the safety of my quiet, cowardly life. I could change my number, move to a different city, start over. I could keep running. But as I looked at the screen at the words, I know who you are, I realized that I was tired. I was so incredibly tired of running. I had been running since I was 18 years old. I had been running from a closet, from a car ride, from a girl's smile, and from my own reflection. I had built a whole life out of running, and all it had gotten me was a hollow chest and a soul full of lead. I looked at the wedding photo of her one last time. She looked so happy, so safe. If I let this stranger tell her, if I let the truth come out in a chaotic, uncontrolled burst of internet drama, I would be failing her for the third time. I would be letting her world be shattered by someone else's hand in someone else's way. If she was going to know, and it seemed inevitable now that she would, then it had to come from me. Not as an anonymous post, not as a whispered rumor, but as a direct, honest confession. I owed her that much. I owed her the dignity of the truth delivered by the person who had stolen it from her in the first place. I opened my social media again. I went to her profile. I clicked the message button. My hands weren't shaking anymore. They were cold, steady, and certain. I didn't think about Manel or Wadim or Eugen. I didn't think about the legal consequences or the social fallout. I only thought about her. Hello, I began. I typed her name, her real name. We haven't spoken in a long time. There is something I need to tell you about the night of the party at the Miller's house. I've spent years being a coward, but I can't be one anymore. You deserve the truth. I didn't hit send yet. I sat there for a long time, the weight of the moment pressing down on me. This was the end of the story I had been telling myself. This was the moment the closet door finally swung open and I stepped out into the light. The blinking cursor in the message box felt like a heartbeat, fast, insistent, and terrifying. I stared at the words I had typed. You deserve the truth. It looked so small on the screen, so inadequate for the sheer weight of the reality I was about to drop on her. I looked at her profile picture again, the wedding photo, the sunshine, the husband. By clicking send, I was essentially walking into that sunlit garden and setting off a grenade. I was choosing to be the villain in her story again, but this time I wouldn't be hiding in the shadows. I would be standing right in front of her, holding the match. I started to doubt myself. Was I doing this for her, or was I doing this to stop the I know who you are stranger from doing it first? Was this just another form of self-preservation? If I told her I controlled the narrative, if someone else told her I was just a monster, exposed. My finger hovered over the trackpad, and for a split second, I felt that familiar cold pull of the closet. I wanted to retreat. I wanted to close the tab, throw my phone in a lake, and move to a city where no one knew my name. I wanted to be a coward one last time. But then I thought about the woman on Reddit. You're leaving her to fight a ghost that you have the power to name. I couldn't let her fight ghosts anymore. If her marriage was strong, it would survive the truth. If her peace was real, it had to be built on a foundation of reality, not a carefully maintained lie. I closed my eyes, took a breath that tasted like ozone and adrenaline, and clicked. Sent. The word appeared in a tiny gray bubble. It was done. The secret was out of the vault. I felt a sudden bizarre lightness, followed immediately by a crushing wave of nausea. I scrambled to the bathroom and barely made it to the sink before I retched. There was nothing in my stomach but coffee and bile. I stayed there for a long time, gripping the edges of the porcelain, watching the water run down the drain. I felt like I was washing away years of filth, but the water wasn't enough. It would never be enough. I went back to my desk and opened the Reddit tab. The post had exploded. It had over 10,000 upvotes now, and the comments were a battlefield. People were tagging r/legal advice, debating whether what Manel and Wadim did constituted a specific type of fraud or sexual assault under the laws of my country. Others were trying to find out who Eugene was searching for Eugen Lindemann on LinkedIn and Facebook. Then my phone buzzed. A text message. My heart nearly stopped. It wasn't from her. It was from Eugen. Delete it, the text read. My blood turned to ice. I didn't reply. 5 seconds later, my phone rang. It was Eugen. I let it vibrate on the desk, the buzzing sound like a hornet trapped in a jar. He called again, and again. Then a message came through on WhatsApp. It was a screenshot of my Reddit post. I know this is you, you prick, Eugen wrote. I know your shitty writing style. Manel is seeing this. Wadim is seeing this. You have no idea what you've started. Delete the post now or we're coming over. The threat was hollow, or at least I hoped it was. We weren't 18 anymore. We were adults with lives and jobs and reputations to lose. But Eugene had always thrived on intimidation. He didn't care about the truth. He only cared about the image. To him, the crime wasn't the assault. It was the confession. I realized then that I wasn't just afraid of the girl's reaction. I was afraid of the boys who had become men without ever growing a conscience. I blocked Eugene's number. Then I blocked Manel. I didn't have Wadim's number, but I knew it was only a matter of time before he reached out too. I felt like a man standing on a dissolving island, the water rising on all sides. I went back to the private message I had sent her. It still said, sent, not seen, not read, just sent. The wait was the worst part. Every minute felt like a year. I tried to distract myself by cleaning my apartment. I scrubbed the floors until my knees were sore. I organized my closet. The irony wasn't lost on me, folding every shirt with obsessive precision. I needed order. I needed to feel like I had control over something, because out there in the digital world, my life was tearing apart at the seams. 3 hours later, the notification sound chimed. It was the social media app. I didn't want to look. I was terrified of what I would see. Would it be a wall of text filled with "how could you" or "I hate you"? Or would it be a simple, devastating "who is this"? I opened the app. She had replied. I remember the light. The message began. I stopped breathing. I thought I was going crazy, she continued. I thought I had imagined it. For years, I told myself I was just too drunk, that I had a nightmare, that I was being paranoid. I asked you in the car because I trusted you. I thought you were the one person who would tell me the truth. When you told me nothing happened, I felt so relieved, but a part of me died that day. I stopped trusting my own mind. I stopped trusting my own body. I read the words over and over, the tears blurring my vision. I had done more than just stay silent. I had gaslit her into doubting her own sanity. I had let her carry the burden of crazy so I wouldn't have to carry the burden of witness. Why now? She asked in a second message. Why after all these years? I typed back, my fingers shaking. Because I saw you were happy and I realized my silence was a lie I was telling you every single day. Because I saw you, Jen, and he laughed about it. Because I couldn't live with the coward in the mirror anymore. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't deserve it, but I had to tell you. Manel knew. Wadim did it, and I watched. The typing bubbles appeared and disappeared. It went on for several minutes. My heart was in my throat. I'm calling the police, she finally wrote, and I'm going to need you to tell them exactly what you just told me. Will you stay in the closet this time, or will you stand up? The question was a gauntlet thrown at my feet. It was the ultimate test. It wasn't just about a Reddit post or a private message anymore. This was about the law. This was about facing Manel and Wadim in a room. This was about looking a detective in the eye and admitting I was an accomplice through inaction. If I agreed my life as I knew it was over, the story would go public, my employer would find out, my family would find out, I could face charges myself depending on the statute of limitations and the local laws. I could lose everything. But then I thought about the girl. She had already lost everything that night, and she had spent years trying to rebuild it on a foundation of shifting sand. She was finally reaching for solid ground, and I was the only one who could give it to her. I thought about the completed line I wanted to write at the end of this chapter of my life. I didn't want it to be a lie. I'll be there, I typed. I'll tell them everything. I'm not hiding anymore. I hit send, and for the first time in a decade, the weight in my chest didn't feel like lead. It felt like a wound, deep, painful, and raw, but it finally felt like a wound that was allowed to bleed. And maybe eventually it would be a wound that could heal. The silence that followed that final message was different from any silence I had ever known. It wasn't the suffocating, dusty silence of the closet, nor was it the hollow, lying silence of the car ride home. This was a heavy, expectant silence, the kind that exists right before a storm breaks. I sat in my darkened apartment, the only light coming from the blue glow of my laptop screen, watching the cursor blink in the chat window. I had given her my word. I had promised to step out into the light, even if that light burned me to a crisp. The next few days were a blur of cold reality and bureaucratic friction. She didn't message me back immediately after I agreed to testify. I didn't blame her. I was the last person she wanted to chat with. I was a tool for justice, a witness she needed, but I was still the man who had watched her world break and said nothing. I spent those days in a state of hypervigilance. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart performed a violent somersault in my chest. The threats from Eugen didn't stop. They morphed from angry outbursts into something colder and more calculated. You think you're a hero, one message read. You're a rat. You're going to destroy lives over something that happened a decade ago. We were kids. If you go through with this, I'll make sure everyone knows exactly what you were doing in that closet. You weren't just a bystander. You were a pervert. It was a desperate tactic, an attempt to use my own shame against me to keep the door shut. And for a moment, it almost worked. The thought of my face being associated with such a sordid story of my family and my colleagues, seeing the pervert label Eugene was trying to pin on me, made me want to vomit. But then I looked at the Reddit post again. I looked at the thousands of strangers who had seen the truth for what it was. Eugene's opinion didn't matter. The only opinion that mattered was the law's, and more importantly, hers. A week later, I received a phone call from a blocked number. I answered it with trembling hands. It was a detective from the Special Victims Unit in the city where the party had taken place. His voice was gravelly and professional, stripped of any emotion. He told me that a report had been filed and that my name had been provided as a primary witness. He asked if I would be willing to come in for a formal statement. Yes, I said. My voice was surprisingly steady. I'll be there. Walking into the police station was one of the most surreal experiences of my life. The air was thick with the smell of floor wax and stale coffee. Officers moved with a purposeful gait, their keys jingling against their belts. It was a place of consequences, a place where secrets were dissected and laid bare. I felt like a criminal even though I was there to help. The detective, a man named Miller, led me into a small windowless interview room. There was a metal table, 2 chairs, and a camera mounted in the corner of the ceiling. He sat across from me and placed a digital recorder on the table. "Before we begin," he said, looking me straight in the eye, "I want you to understand that by giving this statement, you are opening yourself up to a very difficult process. This happened a long time ago. Evidence will be hard to find. It's going to come down to testimony, yours, hers, and the others. Are you prepared for that? Blah. I've spent 10 years preparing for this without realizing it," I told him. He nodded once and hit the record button. For the next 3 hours, I told the story. I told it with a level of detail I didn't know I possessed. I described the closet, the smell of the coats, the way the hangers clattered. I described the switch, the silent predatory movement of Manel pulling away and Wadim taking his place. I described the light. I described the laughter. I didn't look away from the detective as I spoke. I wanted him to see the shame in my eyes, but I also wanted him to see the certainty. Speaking the words out loud to an officer of the law made them permanent. They were no longer just memories. They were evidence. They were a matter of public record. When I finally finished, I felt physically drained as if I had just undergone major surgery without anesthesia. "What happens now?" I asked as Detective Miller turned off the recorder. "Now we talk to the others," he said. "We talk to Manel, we talk to Wadim Manch, and we talk to Eugen Lindemann. We see who breaks first. In cases like this, where there's a group involved, the silence usually cracks once the reality of a prison sentence starts looming." I left the station and walked out into the bright afternoon sun. For the first time, the world didn't feel like it was closing in on me. I had done the one thing I had been terrified to do for a decade. I had told the truth to someone who could actually do something about it. But the fallout was only beginning. Within 48 hours of my statement, the friend group from high school imploded. My phone became a war zone. People I hadn't spoken to in years were reaching out some in support, but most in confusion or anger. The story was leaking. Manel's family was apparently well connected, and they were already hiring high-priced lawyers to bury the story. I received one final message from her a few days later. It wasn't a thank you. It wasn't a forgiveness. It was a photograph. It was a picture of the beach where she had been married, the waves crashing against the shore under a gray, overcast sky. "I went back there today," she wrote. "I realized that for the last few years I've been living in a house built on a lie. Thank you for giving me the hammer to knock it down. I don't know if they will ever go to jail. I don't know if justice is even possible after all this time. But I know what happened now, and for the first time I don't feel like I'm the one who should be ashamed." Reading those words, I finally understood the true cost of my silence. I hadn't just been hiding a crime, I had been stealing her peace of mind. By giving it back, I had lost my own comfort, my own reputation, and my own friends. But it was the best trade I had ever made. There are moments in life that define you not by what you do, but by what you fail to do. For a long time, I was defined by that closet door. I was defined by the light that flickered on and the voice I ignored. But we aren't just the sum of our mistakes. We are also the sum of how we try to fix them. The weeks that followed were a grueling marathon of legal consultations and social isolation. The gears of justice don't turn quickly, especially when they are grinding against a decade of silence. Detective Miller stayed in contact, but his updates were often frustratingly vague. He explained that because so much time had passed, and because there was no physical evidence, no DNA, no crime scene photos, no immediate medical report, the case was what they called a historical report. It relied almost entirely on the credibility of the witnesses, and I was the cornerstone of that credibility. Manel and Wadim didn't go down without a fight. They didn't have to speak to the police, and on the advice of their expensive lawyers, they didn't. Instead, they fought me in the court of public opinion. Rumors started circulating in our old hometown. People I hadn't seen in years were suddenly posting cryptic messages on social media about fake friends and jealousy. Eugen, true to his word, led the charge. He began telling anyone who would listen that I had been obsessed with the girl back in high school and that this was all a twisted revenge fantasy because she had chosen Manel over me. It was a brilliant, disgusting lie. It turned the narrative from a story about a sexual assault into a story about a bitter, lonely guy trying to ruin the lives of successful men. I watched from a distance as my reputation was systematically dismantled. Friends I thought I could count on stopped returning my calls. I was disinvited from a wedding. I even had discussions with my HR department at work after an anonymous tipster sent them a link to the viral Reddit post claiming I was a self-admitted voyeur. Every time I felt the urge to crumble, every time I thought about retracting my statement, just to make the noise stop, I remembered her message. I thought I was going crazy. That was the anchor that kept me grounded. If I took it back, I was handing her back to the darkness. I was telling her that her reality didn't matter as much as my comfort. I couldn't do that. Not again. 3 months after my initial statement, I was called into a law office for a deposition. It wasn't a trial, but it felt like one. The room was cold, filled with mahogany furniture and the smell of expensive stationery. I sat at one end of a long table, and across from me sat Manel's lawyer, a sharp, hawk-like woman who looked at me as if I were something she had found on the bottom of her shoe. Manel was there too. He sat in the corner wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my car. He didn't look like a predator. He looked like a vice president. He didn't look at me not even once. He stared at his reflection in the polished table, his jaw set in a hard, defiant line. For 6 hours, the lawyer grilled me. She went over every second of that night. She asked me exactly how much I had drank. She asked me why, if I was so traumatized, I had stayed for the rest of the party. She asked me why I had driven the girl home and lied to her face. If you were a decent person, she said, her voice dripping with calculated venom, you would have stopped it then. The fact that you waited 10 years suggests that this isn't about the truth, it's about attention. Isn't it, Mr. My Name? It's about the truth, I said, my voice cracking, but holding. The fact that I was a coward then doesn't change what they did. It only makes me a witness who finally grew a conscience. She laughed a short, sharp sound. A conscience or a need for a spotlight? It was a brutal interrogation. They tried to make me doubt my own eyes. They tried to make me feel like I was the one on trial. And in a way I was. I was on trial for the person I used to be. Every time I answered a question, I was forced to confront the 18-year-old in the closet, the boy who had found the situation wild or funny before the horror set in. But the most difficult moment came when the door opened and she walked in. She wasn't there to testify yet. She was there to observe. She sat at the far end of the table, flanked by her own counsel. It was the first time I had seen her in person since that car ride. She looked different. Older, of course, but there was a weight to her presence that hadn't been there before. She didn't look like the fragile girl from the beach photo. She looked like a woman who was reclaiming a piece of herself. Our eyes met for a fraction of a second. There was no smile, no nod of recognition, just a profound, heavy acknowledgement of the secret we now shared in the light. The deposition ended without a smoking gun. There was no dramatic confession from Manel, no breakdown from Wadim, who hadn't even shown up, but something had changed. The silence had been permanently breached. The case never made it to a criminal trial. The prosecutor eventually told us that because of the statute of limitations in that specific jurisdiction and the lack of corroborating physical evidence, they couldn't guarantee a conviction. It was a crushing blow. I felt like I had failed her all over again. But then the civil side of things began to move. And more importantly, the social consequences finally caught up. The Reddit post, combined with the news that a formal investigation had taken place, began to circulate in the professional circles where Manel and Wadim operated. Manel was placed on administrative leave from his firm. Wadim's business partners backed out of a major deal. They weren't behind bars, but the golden boy armor had been shattered. They were no longer the untouchable kings of their social circles. They were the men who had a historical allegation hanging over their heads like a black cloud. And Eugen lost the most. He had spent so much energy defending them, so much energy attacking me, that he had tied his own reputation to theirs. When the details of the light in the closet became public knowledge, the fact that he had turned it on just to see her reaction, even his most loyal defenders turned away. People can overlook a lot of things, but the image of a boy laughing while a friend is violated is a hard image to shake. As for me, I lost a lot. I lost my old friends. I lost my sense of security. I even moved to a different city to escape the whispers. But I gained something I hadn't had in a decade, a clear reflection in the mirror. I still think about that night. I think about the closet. I think about the 3 meters of space that felt like an ocean. I think about the girl, and I hope that every day she feels a little more like she owns her own story. I realize that justice isn't always a gavel hitting a block in a courtroom. Sometimes justice is just the end of a lie. Sometimes it's just the moment when the truth becomes louder than the silence. I wanted to share this because I know there are others out there, people sitting in their own metaphorical closets, watching something wrong happen and telling themselves it's not their business. They tell themselves they are just there. They tell themselves that saying nothing is the same as being innocent. It isn't. If you are a witness to something that haunts you, if you are carrying a secret that feels like lead in your chest, I am telling you now, the closet is only safe as long as you stay in the dark. But you weren't meant to live in the dark. What would you have done? If you were in that closet 3 meters away from someone who trusted the world, would you have opened the door? Or would you have waited 10 years to finally speak up? Sometimes the hardest thing to do isn't the right thing. It's admitting that you didn't do it when it mattered most. But it's never too late to start being the person you should have been. If this story resonated with you, or if you've ever found yourself in a situation where you had to choose between your own comfort and the truth, share your thoughts in the comments. We only grow when we stop hiding. And if you want to hear more stories about the moments that define us, consider subscribing. We're all just trying to find our way out of the closet.